So Marvel Studios has basically dominated the box office for the 2010s. And I think some of that has been a detriment to the general culture of the way that we consume media, but I also think a lot of really good films have come out of that. I maintain that Infinity War is probably one of the better films of the 21st century, and I think Endgame was a really good way to wrap up the decade of films that they had put out to that point. But after Endgame, everything seems to have been directionless, rudderless, and they've been pushing out a lot of Disney Plus shows that we recently found out they haven't been having showrunners for. Marvel thought, well, we've been dominating the box office for so long, we can just invent our own way of making TV. And it turns out that no, actually, the methods involved in making TV have been hammered out over decades and decades and decades. And so there's a reason that you have a showrunner on a show. There's a reason you have pilots and a series Bible. And so Marvel, after making a whole bunch of very middling TV shows, have decided, okay, maybe we should actually go back and do what works. All of that has been coming out in little bits and pieces here, but there was a really big expose put out by Variety about some of the really big troubles that Marvel Studios has been going through, and I wanted to go over that with you. Crisis at Marvel. Jonathan Majors' backup plans. The Marvels reshoots. Reviving original Avengers and more issues revealed. This past September, a group of Marvel creatives, including studio chief Kevin Feige, assembled in Palm Springs for the studio's annual retreat. Most years, the vibe would have been confident, even cocky, given how the premier superhero brand, owned by Disney since 2009, has remade the entertainment business in its image. But this occasion was angst-ridden. Everyone at Marvel was reeling from a series of disappointments on screen, a legal scandal involving one of its biggest stars, and questions about the viability of the studio's ambitious strategy to extend the brand beyond movies into streaming. The most pressing issue to be discussed at the retreat was what to do about Jonathan Majors, the actor who had been poised to carry the next phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but instead is headed to a high-profile trial in New York later this month on domestic violence charges. The actor insists he is the victim, but the damage to his reputation and the chance he could lose the case has forced Marvel to reconsider its plans to center the next phase of its interlocking slate of sequels, spin-offs, and series around Major's villainous character Kang the Conqueror. Okay, so there's a simple solution here, and it's just to recast him. And you don't even need to do any kind of sci-fi explanations for why Kang suddenly looks different now, because they already have one. Loki has been kind of the main show that has been explaining how the multiverse works in the MCU, and it introduced the concept of variants, where in Loki there is the sacred timeline, which is the main MCU timeline, and anything that differs from that is a variant. And there is, in fact, one of the main characters on Loki is a variant of Loki, who is a woman, and played by a different actress. So all you have to do, since the whole threat of Kang is that all of his variants are this kind of, they all are seeking multiversal domination. All you have to do is introduce new variants played by a different actor, and they've already established that variants can be played by different actors. It's fine. At the gathering in Palm Springs, executives discussed backup plans, including pivoting to another comic book adversary like Doctor Doom. But making any shift would carry its own headaches. Majors was already a big presence in the MCU, including as the scene-stealing antagonist in February's Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and he has been positioned as the franchise's next big thing in this season of Loki, particularly in the finale, which airs on November 9th, and sets up Kang as the titular star of a fifth Avengers film in 2026. So, as of filming this, episode 5 of season 2 of Loki has just come out. I'll be reviewing that in a little bit. So next week we'll be seeing the finale of the series. I think it's the series finale. It could be a season finale, but I assume they're just going 2 seasons. So I don't know what they have exactly planned for Kang in the show, but he has appeared in a couple episodes already. Marvel is truly fucked with the whole Kang angle, says one top deal maker who has seen the final Loki episode. And they haven't had an opportunity to rewrite until very recently because of the WGA strike. But I don't see a path to how they move forward with him. Yeah, just recast him. Beyond the bad press for Majors, the brain trust at Marvel is also grappling with the November release of The Marvels, a sequel to 2019's blockbuster Captain Marvel that has been plagued with lengthy reshoots and now appears likely to underwhelm at the box office. This is all an unprecedented turn of fortune for a company that has enjoyed a nearly uninterrupted string of hits ever since it started independently producing its movies with 2008's Iron Man. That wildly profitable run culminated in the $2.8 billion success of 2019's Avengers Endgame, a high watermark for the studio that has earned nearly $30 billion over 32 films. That is almost $1 billion a film. That is, wow, that is impressive. Replicating that kind of phenomenon is never easy. However, the source of Marvel's current troubles can be traced back to 2020. That's when the COVID pandemic ushered in a mandate to help boost Disney's stock price with an endless torrent of interconnected Marvel content for the studio's fledgling streaming platform, Disney+. Okay, I'm going to counter this claim, interconnected Marvel content, because so far, there really hasn't been any major interconnected show content. WandaVision was setting up Doctor Strange 2 in Multiverse of Madness, but WandaVision itself was fairly standalone. I mean, it plays off. It's like a sequel to Endgame, but like everybody saw Endgame, so you didn't really need to do a lot of homework there. And then I guess Secret Invasion was probably the one that you needed more homework for, but nobody watched that show, and you don't need to watch that show. It was total garbage anyway. A lot of the other things are just kind of standalone stories with a lot of them trying to introduce new Marvel characters. The interconnectedness has actually been pretty lacking in Phase 4 and 5, I would say. A lot of these shows feel too standalone, feel like they don't connect enough with the broader MCU. And a lot of that has just been the movie slate got delayed because of the pandemic. And so we're only now starting to see that thing come out. Like The Marvels was originally supposed to come out a year ago, and now it's coming out next week. So I don't know how I would call it interconnected. That might be a goal, but that's certainly not what they achieved. According to the plan, there would never be a lapse in superhero fare with either a film in theaters or a new television series streaming at any given moment. And it certainly feels like for the last couple of years, there was pretty much a steady diet of Marvel content at any point, which kind of made it feel like product to consume rather than something that felt like actually inspired. But the ensuing tsunami of spandex proved to be too much of a good thing, and the demands of churning out so much programming taxed the Marvel apparatus. Moreover, the need to tease out an interwoven storyline over so many disparate shows, movies, and platforms created a muddled narrative that baffled viewers. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. And no, it's not an interwoven storyline. The thing is, Marvel has this philosophy called fix it in post, where it doesn't matter what you've written, really, because they're going to actually find the story in the edit bay. And they're going to repurpose scenes for completely different situations. And like I said, they haven't had showrunners up to this point, which means traditionally the head writer on a series would be the showrunner, and they would be there throughout all of pre-production through to post-production to ensure that there is a consistent vision. And Marvel hasn't been doing that. The writers have basically been like, okay, you wrote the thing, we'll take it from here. Which, have you ever heard the story, a camel is a horse made by committee? I got that from Parks and Rec, but it leads to that. It leads to something where it's like you had too many cooks in the kitchen, and now it just doesn't look like anything. And it's really hard to build a larger narrative that feels like it has a cohesive vision when you're doing it that way. I genuinely at this point feel like they don't know what their plan is beyond they've picked titles for those movies. Like, they've got the Kang Dynasty is going to be Avengers 5 and Avengers 6 is Secret Wars. And you can just say those are going to be our movies and not have a further plan beyond that because, well, Secret Wars was literally invented in the 80s to sell new toys to kids because they found out that having Secret in a comic book title and having War in a comic book title made them sell better, and selling the comic line made them sell new toys that they could put in the comic line. It was literally just an excuse to bash all of your action figure superheroes together. So Avengers Secret Wars itself could literally be anything. They've got the multiverse, so I assume the plan is to get as many actors who have played superhero versions of Marvel characters, going all the way back to, you know, the late 90s, early 2000s with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man to, Bryan Singer's The X-Men. And who knows, maybe we'll even get Wesley Snipes back as Blade. Oh, he's out of prison now, right? So they could just literally do anything there, but because they can do anything there, it doesn't feel like they actually have a cohesive plan of where they're going. The Marvel machine was pumping out a lot of content. Did it get to the point where there was just too much and they were burning people out on superheroes? It's possible, says Wall Street analyst Eric Handler, who covers Disney. The more you do, the tougher it is to maintain quality. They tried experimenting with breaking in some new characters like Shang-Chi and Eternals with mixed results. With budgets as big as these, you need home runs. The Marvels, which opens in theaters on November 10th, will struggle to get the ball past the infield, at least by Marvel's outside standards. The movie, which cost $250 million and sees Brie Larson reprising her role as Captain Marvel, is tracking to open to $75 to $80 million, far below the $185 million Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness took in domestically in its debut weekend last year. And I should also point out, a $250 million budget. So generally the rule of thumb is that a movie needs to make back 4 times its filming budget in order to turn a profit, because the budget for a film does not include the ad campaign, and traditionally they will spend as much as the film budget on the ad campaign. So that means the movie cost them $500 million to make. And then they have to split revenue share with the theaters. So they need to basically make double that before they even start seeing profits turning from it. And now Captain Marvel, the first one, that made $1 billion. So setting that price there, $250 million for a budget, that makes sense if you assume you're going to be making $1 billion at the box office. But if you're not making $1 billion at the box office, that's a lot of money. Directed by Nia DaCosta, The Marvels unites Larson's heroine with 2 super-powered allies, Teyonah Parris' Monica Rambeau, introduced in WandaVision, and Iman Vellani's Kamala Khan, first seen in 2022 series Ms. Marvel. But instead of seamlessly building on the success of Captain Marvel, this movie resulted in 4 weeks of reshoots to bring coherence to a tangled storyline. Then eyebrows were raised again when DaCosta began working on another film while The Marvels was still in post-production. The filmmaker moved to London earlier this year to begin prepping for her Tessa Thompson drama Hedda. A representative for DaCosta declined to comment. Okay, so I have to say, this right here, they're making it sound worse than it is. Marvel doesn't actually care about its directors. Most Marvel films are made by the VFX team and the producers. Often what you will see, they get a lot of fresh talent, directors who have like an indie hit. They'll bring them in because it's like, oh, this fresh indie director. And they will bring them in to shoot the human scenes. And then everything else, all of the action, all the CGI is basically handled by the team that already handles that. Directors will come into a picture where most of the story has already been broken, at least in terms of the action for it, because there's a ton of previs that goes into these movies. So this doesn't surprise me that the director they hired to direct the human scenes wouldn't be as hands-on in post-production, because that's how they've built their entire setup. Like, it's very rare for these days for a Marvel director to actually like remain the auteur and have control over everything toward the end. I know for Black Panther, Ryan Coogler directed Black Panther, and he was very insistent that he bring in his own crew to make that movie, because traditionally they have, I think, 3 different units that are always in production at some point, some part of the process. And so Marvel's got their team, but Ryan Coogler had people that he's worked with on previous films, and he's like, no, these are my guys. I work with them. They understand me. I understand them. We're going to make this movie. And even then, that film still had its Marvel third act problems where it just became a rushed CGI mess. But it still has, ignoring that, a very distinct look, because they had an auteur director in Ryan Coogler. And Multiverse of Madness feels like a Raimi film. It's still a Marvel movie, but like they got Sam Raimi and they're like, you don't hire Sam Raimi to make a movie unless he's making a Sam Raimi movie. But in general, for the most part, when you hire a director at Marvel, you're hiring them to film the human scenes, and then everything else is kind of just run through the Marvel production assembly line. If you're directing a $250 million movie, it's kind of weird for the director to leave with a few months to go, says a source familiar with the production. Yeah, I don't agree with this. I mean, let me point to a famous example. Jurassic Park. Spielberg handed over post-production of Jurassic Park to George Lucas so that he could go make Schindler's List. And Jurassic Park was a fantastic film. You don't always need your director to be there to handle post-production. So long as you have a creative team, like so long as you've got the writers still involved at some point, so long as the producers are all on board with the artistic vision, you don't necessarily need the director there through the end of it. And not every director is as well versed in every stage of a film's production. Some are just stronger at the actual filming part of it. So, and particularly the way that Marvel makes their films, this just feels like somebody is trying to throw her under the bus when the film kind of feels like it's going to flop. It feels like this is putting this into the article to try and lay the blame on the director. The Marvels has seen its release date move back twice too, once to swap places with Quantumania, which was deemed further along, and again when its debut shifted from July to November to give the filmmakers more time to tinker. That extra time didn't necessarily help. In June, Marvel, which traditionally only solicits feedback from Disney employees and their friends and families, took the uncharacteristic step of holding a public test screening in Texas. The audience gave the film middling reviews. But Marvel has never been in the business of being average. Kevin's real superpower, his genius, has always been in post-production and getting his hands on movies and making sure that they finish strongly, the source adds. These days, he's spread thin. Feige declines to comment for this story. Feige isn't the only person showing signs of strain. Marvel's entire VFX battalion, including staffers and vendors, is struggling to keep pace with a never-ending stream of productions. This past February, when the credits rolled at the world premiere of Quantumania, shock rippled through the Regency Village Theater in Westwood over some shoddy CGI. There were at least 10 scenes where the visual effects had been added at the last minute and were out of focus, as one veteran power broker who was there. It was insane. I've never seen something like that in my entire career. Everyone was talking about it. Even the kids of executives were talking about it. Yeah, okay. They're probably talking about MODOK in Quantumania, who looked dog shit. Actually, let me pull up. This is what they're talking about. That looked dog shit. They should have, like, he had like a mask on for part of it, and they should have kept that on for the whole thing. Now, in the MCU version of MODOK, this is Darren Cross, who was Yellow Jacket, the villain in the first film. And when his regulator was damaged in his suit, he started shrinking down to the quantum level, but like he didn't shrink down all consistently all at once. Like his limbs started shrinking down first. So the end result is this is how his body got twisted when he ends up in the quantum realm. But it just looks really bad, especially because they're like squishing his head and stretching his face to fit in the whole MODOK suit. Now, MODOK in the comics is a very silly looking character, okay? Let me see if I can find just the general MODOK art. Okay, this is what MODOK looks like in the comics. So he's a very silly design already. But I think the biggest mistake they could have made was trying to give him a human face. They should have made it a little bit more alien looking. But because they were converting MODOK to be an existing character in the MCU, it didn't work. And the fact that they had moved Quantumania ahead by several months to release it sounds like they rushed it even further. God, what a mistake that was. The schedule swap with the Marvels had left the Ant-Man sequel in a squeeze, pushing up its post-production schedule by 4.5 months. Yeah, there you go. Marvel films are known for coming down to the wire, given Feige's ability to foam the runway and land a plane that way, says one executive familiar with how the company operates. But this level of unfinished was unprecedented and would be noted in scathing reviews when the tentpole with the $200 million budget opened 11 days after the premiere. Critics weren't the only ones dismayed. Fed up with 14-hour days and no overtime, Marvel VFX workers voted unanimously to unionize in September, sparking an industry-wide trend. Goddamn right. They are the first VFX members in Hollywood to be unionized. They joined IATSE, and Disney's separate to VFX team also joined. Now, that's most VFX workers are working overseas in production houses, So those people aren't unionized, but these are like the on the set VFX team. I think Marvel has a team of like 18 people and Disney has a team of like 11 to 13 people. I may have those numbers wrong. I'm going off memory here, so I could be completely wrong, but it's not like the majority of the VFX work, but it is a lot of people who are doing on the set stuff. The year 2023 was the straw that broke the camel's back, says former Marvel Studios VFX assistant coordinator Anna George, who appeared before the Congressional Labor Caucus on October 19th to testify about the studio's untenable deadlines and working conditions. The pay and long hours at Marvel were the reason we had to start a unionization process there. The conditions were completely unsustainable. Disney's top brass, including newly returned CEO Bob Iger, was said to be apoplectic about Marvel's VFX troubles. 1 month after the Quantumania premiere debacle, the guillotine fell on Victoria Alonso, yeah, I remember that, who oversaw the studio's physical production, post-production, VFX, and animation. While the reason cited for her abrupt firing was her unauthorized role as an executive producer on the Oscar-nominated film Argentina 1985, insiders say Disney was incensed that quality control on its Marvel productions was plummeting, particularly on the ever-expanding TV front. Yeah, basically, I remember this going down. I wasn't covering this stuff on my channel at the time because I've only been streaming for a couple of months, but I remember I follow the Marvel Studios spoilers subreddit, and a lot of this information was being posted and speculated about there. The VFX logjam has been evident for some time, with some final effects for such Disney Plus series as WandaVision and She-Hulk Attorney at Law inserted after their streaming debuts. That Alonso was busy promoting her art house project while Rome burned certainly didn't sit well with Disney's leadership. Alonso's attorney says her client is unable to comment. Unable to comment, not declined to comment, suggests that there is a current legal case going on there. But some internal sources suggest Alonso was a scapegoat and point to the She-Hulk VFX issues as a symptom of a deeper rot, namely a lack of oversight on script development. In the original arc of She-Hulk, a flashback of star Tatiana Maslany's transformation into her Hulk character didn't take place until episode 8, the penultimate episode. But after Marvel's Brain Trust watched footage, it realized the scene needed to happen in the pilot episode so that audiences could see more of the character's backstory early. That meant that the VFX team was tasked with fixing the mess in post-production. That actually surprises me because the VFX in the pilot was probably some of the best that the show had, and it was like subsequent episodes that had weaker stuff. I also think in general the VFX for She-Hulk herself was a lot worse than the VFX for Hulk, and that may just be an issue too of Hulk has been in several films, so over, the decade since they've been doing Hulk in film, they had existing models to work with. They'd worked with Mark Ruffalo before, so a lot of that polish was already in there and they knew how to animate him, whereas She-Hulk is a new character. But that really surprises me that if this was the 8th episode that they shuffled to the first episode, generally that would have meant that it would have been like on the back burner in terms of where the VFX team is like focused. So it's actually surprising to me that if they'd moved that from the end of the season to the beginning, that it looked as good as it did. The so-called bad VFX we see was because of half-baked scripts, says one person involved with She-Hulk. That is not Victoria, that is Kevin. And even above Kevin, those issues should be addressed in pre-production. The timeline is not allowing the Marvel executives to sit with the material. All the while, Marvel was bleeding money, with a single episode of She-Hulk costing some $25 million, dwarfing the budget of a final season episode of HBO's Game of Thrones, but without a similar zeitgeist bang. The August 2022 series premiere at the El Capitan Theater foreshadowed what was to come 6 months later at the Quantumania bow. The She-Hulk special effects were out of focus in multiple scenes. There are signs that the flood of product is leading people to tune out. I'm not prepared to call it a permanent fall, but based on the numbers that go with Marvel podcasts, Marvel-based articles, friends who do Marvel-based video coverage, all of those numbers are significantly down, says Joanna Robinson, co-author of the New York Times bestseller MCU: The Reign of Marvel Studios, who is a writer and podcaster at The Ringer. The quality is suffering. In 2019 at the peak, if you put Marvel Studios in front of something, people were like, oh, that brand means quality. That association is no longer the case because there have been so many projects that felt half-baked and undercooked. Yeah, I have felt like if you told me right before Endgame came out that was going to be like the last really good thing from Marvel and everything else was going to be a directionless mess, I would have been like, I don't really believe you. But I have been a Marvel fanboy for a very long time. Since the beginning. A lot of you younger folk probably grew up just having these movies come out when you were in like high school or whatnot. But for me, I was an adult when Iron Man came out, and I had spent my childhood with just, getting like standalone movies. And I really wanted to see team ups. Like, we had the X-Men and Spider-Man coming out around the same time. And I'm like, well, why can't Spider-Man do a movie with the X-Men? Why can't Wolverine show up in one of these things? And so for Iron Man to come out and tease the Avengers, they had me pretty much from the start. I was a big comic book fan growing up in the 80s and 90s, and was very excited when Marvel Studios did its thing. So they had me for a really long time. And I'm still watching everything Marvel puts out. Well, I'm going to go see Captain Marvel, or the Marvels, next week. But it feels like a chore now. And that really sucks. As public criticism mounts, Feige is pulling the plug on scripts and projects that aren't working. Case in point, the Blade reboot. With Mahershala Ali signed on for the eponymous role of a vampire, things look promising for a 2023 release date. Well, it's November, so that's not happening. But the project has gone through at least 5 writers, 2 directors, and 1 shutdown 6 weeks before production. One person familiar with the script permutation says the story at one point morphed into a narrative led by women and filled with life lessons. Blade was relegated to the 4th lead. A bizarre idea considering that the studio had 2-time Oscar winner Ali on board. Yeah, if you're making a Blade movie, Blade should be the lead character. Like, I understand at this point Marvel wants every movie to be a team-up movie and to introduce new characters who can get their own spin-offs and stuff. But if Blade's not even going to be the main character in his own movie, yeah, you messed up somewhere along the way. Amid reports that Ali was ready to exit over script issues, Feige went back to the drawing board and hired Michael Green, the Oscar-nominated writer of Logan, to start anew. Speculation around town is that the studio is looking to make the film, now slated for 2025, on a budget of less than $100 million, a deviation from Marvel's big spending strategy. I think they're going to have to start doing that. I know Echo, the next Disney Plus Marvel show, they just actually the trailer for that just premiered today, and it's I think they're the first Disney Plus Marvel TV MA rated show, and the trailer has a lot of violence and blood in it, and this was a lower budget show. This does not have the film budget that some of the other Disney Plus shows have had. Like, I know Falcon and the Winter Soldier had like a $250 million budget, but this I think was shot for under $100 million. And I think that's fine, especially if you're doing like street level superheroes, where you don't need the big stakes with, cities blowing up, but you can just have like people fighting criminals and punching them and getting, bloody fists and stuff like that. I mean, that worked out really well for the Netflix Marvel series, Daredevil and Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, and, well, Iron Fist and The Defenders kind of sucked, but, they were in there. Those other 3 shows, those were really strong shows that didn't need a huge budget to make an entertaining thing. And it looks like Echo, especially because Kingpin is back for this one, I kind of am... That's like the first thing coming out from Marvel Studios that I saw the trailer for. I'm actually feeling some promise. And so I think having a Blade film with under $100 million, that's fine, because Blade fights vampires, and you don't need CGI to make vampires. You just put fake teeth on them. With Iger publicly acknowledging the downside of a Marvel TV glut that diluted focus and attention, the keepers of the comic book empire are considering some dramatic moves. Sources say there have been talks to bring back the original gang for an Avengers movie. This would include reviving Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man and Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow, both of whom were killed off in Endgame. That shouldn't be a stumbling block in comic books. Beloved characters are often killed off only to be resurrected thanks to the power of things like the multiverse. But the studio hasn't yet committed to the idea. If it were able to bring those actors back, it wouldn't come cheap. Sources say Downey Jr.'s upfront salary for Iron Man 3 was around $25 million. That is a horrible idea. They should not do it. Do not bring back RDJ. He had such a fantastic exit in Endgame. I think it perfectly wrapped up his character arc. If they bring him back, I feel like it would do a disservice to the character. Now, obviously, if they did bring him back, it would probably be a parallel universe version of him. It is the multiverse, so you can bring back anybody to play anything. But, oh god, no. That sounds horrible. Like, that is just a naked cash grab at that point, and I don't believe that they could pull that off well. I think you could throw the best writer that you have at it, and it would still feel hollow. so I really don't want them to do that. Will that solve Marvel's Majors problem? When the Quantumania actor was arrested in March, Disney executives insisted that they could afford to play a wait-and-see game, given that Avengers: The Kang Dynasty wasn't expected to begin shooting until early 2024. But then Majors was dropped in quick succession by his publicists and managers. He remains a client at WME, the agency where he landed after CAA parted ways with him pre-arrest for his brutal conduct towards staff, says one source. CAA declined to comment. In April, other alleged domestic violence victims of Major began cooperating with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Then, ahead of a key hearing in October, media outlets including Variety obtained a court filing that referenced a police incident in London involving Majors that led his ex-girlfriend to seek medical attention. Making matters even stickier, the ex-girlfriend also worked on Quantumania as a movement coach, and the London incident took place while Majors was shooting season 2 of Loki. On October 25th, a New York judge denied Majors' motion to dismiss the case, which ensures that the actor will stand trial in late November. We'll see. The trial date keeps getting pushed back. Like, I did a video talking about the Jonathan Majors issue months ago, and when I put that video out, the trial was supposed to begin the next week. So it keeps getting pushed back, and, you know, Majors has... I'm sure he's got the Marvel lawyers helping him out because Marvel really wants this case to go away so they can just keep making movies with the guy because they've kind of gone all in on him. I mean, I think some behind the scenes stuff was saying that they really didn't have a plan for the multiverse arc until they saw his performance as Kang in Quantumania. Once that happened, they're like, oh, okay, now we know. We've got our new Thanos now because Jonathan Majors is a really good actor. Although his performance in Loki has not been that great. I mean, last season with He Who Remains, I thought that was a good performance, but his performance as Victor Timely, I put a video out on that, and it's not good. His legal team is attempting to keep some material in the case sealed. A studio source notes that regardless of the actor's legal issues, Marvel already had considered moving away from a Majors-led phase because of the box office performance of Quantumania, which will struggle to make a profit. It gave people pause given that Quantumania didn't exactly land, the source says. On October 27th, Disney removed another Majors film, Searchlight's magazine Dreams, from the release calendar. Yeah, sounds like they're not confident that he's gonna win this case. Recasting Majors is also an option, as Feige did when he replaced Terrence Howard in Iron Man 2 with Don Cheadle. In fact, Marvel isn't afraid to change direction even after making splashy announcements. Armor Wars was first unveiled as a series and is now being developed as a feature, while the studio's push to adapt the comic book Inhumans into a feature film generated headlines but is now dormant. The now-defunct Marvel Television mounted an Inhumans TV series in 2017 that ran for one season on ABC. Let me talk about that, okay, because it sounds like the writer doesn't really understand what went down there. So at the time that Inhumans was announced, they were announcing their Phase 3 film slate, I want to say, and Inhumans was put at the very end of the film slate. And at that point, Disney had not yet acquired Fox, which meant that Fox still owned the rights to the X-Men. And also at that point, Marvel Studios had not yet been reorganized out from underneath Marvel Entertainment, which meant that Kevin Feige answered directly to Ike Perlmutter. Ike Perlmutter, the CEO of Marvel Entertainment at the time, was a notorious penny pincher, notorious sexist, all sorts of things. I mean, the dude literally was like, he's friends with Trump. He's kind of a shitty person. And he didn't want anything to be made in the comics furthering mutants because they didn't own the film rights to the X-Men. Basically, anytime they would make a new X-Men on the comics, that meant that Fox, because they owned the film rights to the X-Men, would automatically gain the film rights to that character. And so, because Marvel had the Inhumans, which was another group of people all with the same origin, which is that they're actually genetically engineered sister species to humans, and they gain their powers when they come in contact with the Terrigen Mist. It's a whole thing. Basically, Ike Perlmutter's like, look, this is a bunch of people who all get their power in the same way, just like the X-Men are a bunch of people who all get their power in the same way. So we'll just replace the X-Men with the Inhumans. Kevin Feige wanted nothing to do with it. And I think he agreed to put Inhumans on the film slate in order to get Ike Perlmutter to agree to have Robert Downey Jr. in Civil War. Ike Perlmutter did not want Robert Downey Jr. in Civil War because he thought it would be too expensive. But then Eventually, Kevin Feige made a proposal to Bob Iger to get Marvel Studios reorganized out away from Marvel Entertainment so that he wouldn't have to answer to Ike Perlmutter anymore. And suddenly got a lot more creative freedom and was able to do bigger budget things. Like Civil War, I think, is a really good Marvel movie. And we wouldn't have got basically all of the Avengers in that film if Ike Perlmutter was still in charge. And because Marvel Studios got reorganized out, Inhumans, they just quietly dropped that from the film slate, and Marvel Television, which was at that point still under control of Marvel Entertainment, separate from Marvel Studios, they decided, okay, well, we'll just make Inhumans a TV show instead. This is also why before the Disney Plus TV shows, any Marvel TV show, while they might have ostensibly said it was in the MCU, it always ever worked one way. Like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had Phil Coulson, who was famously in the first phase of the MCU in a lot of those films, and they would occasionally get like side characters from the films to show up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but for the most part, anything that happened in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was like a reaction to the movies, but nothing that happened in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. ever ended up in the movies, unless it was working its way around. Like the big reveal in Avengers 2 in Age of Ultron, where Nick Fury shows up with the helicarrier. They were building up to that in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but it wasn't like they thought it up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and then incorporated it into Age of Ultron. It was, hey, we're going to have the helicarrier show up in Age of Ultron. Can you have a running plot where Coulson has a secret project that he's not letting anyone know about, and then they reveal that it's the helicarrier at the end of the season? So you would have things like that. And then you had the Netflix Marvel shows where they could make oblique references to events of the films, but they couldn't like directly name things. Like they couldn't say Thor, they would say the guy with the hammer. They couldn't say Hulk, they would say the big green guy. They couldn't say Loki's attack on New York, they would call it the incident. And that's because at that point, Kevin Feige had nothing to do with those shows. I think the only one of those shows that he had any involvement with was the first season of Agent Carter. Beyond that, those shows were all basically kind of working on their own. And so, because Ike Perlmutter was still in charge, you had a lot of cost-cutting measures there. Dude's very, very frugal. Andrew Blood says, I thought IMAX paid for Inhumans. Yes, there was a coordination between Marvel Television and IMAX. The first 2 episodes of Inhumans were premiered in IMAX. That's actually how I saw the first 2 episodes. That did not look good though, because it was still shot as a TV show. It was still lit as a TV show. It did not feel like I was seeing an IMAX presentation. And I don't think it did well at the box office. It was only there for like 2 weeks, but I don't know if that worked out well financially for anyone involved. Still, there was one bright spot in 2023, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which became Marvel's biggest draw of the year with $845 million worldwide. The fact that it was directed by James Gunn, the guy now running Rivals DC Studios, was lost on no one. I should also point out that James Gunn actually wrote the script for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 before he was temporarily fired. And since then, he went on to make The Suicide Squad and Peacemaker for DC before coming back to Marvel to film Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. There is basically no real connection in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 to anything else going on in Phase 4 of the MCU. There's some reference to the events of Endgame, obviously, because, you know, Gamora was brought back after having died in Infinity War. But there's no real reference to the fact that they were hanging out with Thor even. Because, like, the Guardians show up briefly at the beginning of Thor 4, but then Thor goes off his own way, and they just kind of forget about it. James Gunn had no interest in having Thor in a Guardians movie, so he just didn't bother to write about it at all. And James Gunn is one of those directors that I really put my faith in. Like when he announced that he was going to have Crypto in the next Superman movie, if anybody else said that, I was like, well, don't put the frickin' Superdog in a Superman movie. But because it's James Gunn, I trust him to do that. Christopher Bilko says Kevin Feige and James Gunn are friends. Yeah, of course they are. But it's still complicated now because James Gunn is the president of DC Studios. So he can't really do any more work with Marvel at this point. They're rival studios. You know, Kevin and him might be friends interpersonally, but like the broader studios are like, you guys can't work together. We're different studios. But Kevin Feige has often just been like somebody who will give advice to other studios. Like before Marvel and Sony were able to enter into that agreement to share Spider-Man, Kevin Feige was still giving Amy Pascal advice on how to make the Spider-Man movies. Like the Amazing Spider-Man movies, he was giving notes on those. Amy Pascal would send him the script or show him screeners, and he would say, here's what I think needs fixed here, here, and here, because Kevin Feige wanted to make sure that there were good superhero movies, because if every superhero movie that comes out is bad, that hurts Marvel too. Even if Marvel is putting out nothing but bangers, if every other single superhero movie out there is bad, that contributes to superhero fatigue, which really hurts Marvel Studios. With Marvel, it used to be as close to a guarantee as you could get, says Paul Durgarabedian. I'm sorry, I'm butchering your last name there. A box office analyst at ComScore. So going all in on the budgets made sense. Guardians 3 was a bit overlooked in how successful it was, but that had James Gunn and Chris Pratt, and I think star power is becoming more important. Then there was Quantumania with $476 million. Anything under $500 million is viewed as a disappointment, and these overreaching expectations are a result of so much success over the years. The key to reinvigorating Marvel may lie with the superhero arsenal that Disney acquired during its 2019 purchase of 21st Century Fox. That deal brought several blue-chip heroes, such as the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, back under the studio's control. Already, fans are geeking out about next year's Deadpool 3, which unites Ryan Reynolds' Merc with the Mouth with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, and a reboot of Fantastic Four slated for 2025. As a bonus, the Fox editions give Feige an opportunity to reimagine the X-Men franchise, the very property he cut his teeth on as a young executive at Lauren Schuler Donner's production company. Now that the WGA strike is in the rearview mirror, Marvel has started talking to writers about bringing the X-Men into the MCU fold. And we've actually already seen the first moves toward that, because in the comics, Miss Marvel is an Inhuman, but in the MCU, for the Miss Marvel show, they very much established that she's a mutant. Now, her mutant powers were kind of activated by this extraterrestrial bracelet that she wears, but like at the start of the film or of the series, you think it's just the bracelet that's giving her the powers, but then they determine, no, we found a mutation in your genome, and that just activated it. So that was the first time that they were establishing, okay, we've got mutants in the MCU now. And I know that, I think in the comics, they have since now either retconned or did some weird, it would have to be a retcon, but I think in the comics, she is now officially a mutant, and she has joined the X-Men. So it sounds like they're using her as their entry point into introducing the X-Men to the MCU. While Feige recalibrates, the rest of the industry is anxiously hoping that Marvel's best days are not behind it. Writing the Marvel obituary would be ill-advised, says Jason Squire, professor emeritus at USC School of Cinematic Arts and host of the Movie Business podcast. Kevin Feige is the Babe Ruth of movie executives, and Marvel has the most profitable track record in movie history, no question. And that's the end of the article. Christopher Bilka says she is now a mutant and an Inhuman in the comics. Okay, yeah, that sounds about like what I understood. Tyler Jones says, do you think that floundering at Marvel is because they put all their eggs in the streaming basket and streaming is nowhere near as profitable as people expected? I think a lot of studios have been feeling the squeeze there. A lot of them went all in on doing high budget streaming television when the pandemic hit. And I think a lot of that was probably anticipating that we would have been taking the pandemic more seriously than we ended up doing. I mean, like, the pandemic is still going on, but people act like it's over now. And so people are going back to seeing movies. I mean, granted, I'm going to see movies. Now, I try to make sure that I go see matinee screenings during the week so that I minimize, like, how many people I'm around when I go to see them. It's very rare that I go see a movie where there's a lot of people in the theater. But because of that, spending all of your money on streaming products, a lot of streaming studios were citing losses. Paramount canceled Star Trek Discovery because of these losses. They canceled Star Trek Prodigy because of these losses. Now, fortunately, Prodigy is going to be coming back anyway on Netflix, and Discovery, they were at least able to reshoot the ending of season 5, which premieres next year, so that they could turn it into a more proper series finale. But a lot of studios were feeling the squeeze when going all in on streaming products underperformed. But anyway, it sounds like Marvel is having some issues. And as somebody who has been a Marvel fanboy for basically my whole life, I don't like to see it. I do think that Disney's Marvel has probably done some bad things to just the way that films are being made these days and how everything has to be a franchise property. But that doesn't mean that I want to see Marvel fail. I like these characters. I grew up reading these characters, and being able to see them on screen, that means a lot to me personally. And so, honestly, I think the best thing would be for them to slow down and focus on making fewer but better and more polished films. And also to, make sure that the entire VFX industry is unionized, because working 14-hour days with no overtime, basically every other aspect of the film industry is unionized, but because VFX really didn't exist until Star Wars, and that was after the whole push to get the entire industry unionized, they just never ended up being it. And, Star Wars came out in 1977, and Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980, and Reagan, famously gutted union protections. I mean, he fired all those air traffic controllers when they went on strike, and the country hasn't really seen a resurgence in union power until the last couple years. So it's heartening now to see VFX workers start to unionize. But as I've talked about before with this, a lot of the reason that movies look as bad as they do is because of this idea of, CGI will fix it, we'll just do it in post, and then they rush it in post. But if VFX is unionized, it will cost the studios more, which means that instead of just having this idea of fix it in post, do it in CGI because it's cheap, we can send it overseas, they might reconsider, okay, well, we have to do this right, so let's do it right. We might see a return of a lot more practical effects, which tends to look better, and I think it will end up with us getting better products all around. Ex Oblivion says, yeah, Vosh talked about that a lot. Since his father works in VFX, we need VFX unions. Yeah. Mark Kaczynski, Vosh's dad. He's a cool dude. I follow him on Twitter. He's mostly using Twitter just to get in fights with fascists, but it's always fun to see. And actually, it was a couple months back, he had, I think it was for Father's Day, he had posted a meme of Batman going, yeah, I'm Batman, except he changed it to, yeah, I'm Vosh dad. And I said, thank you so much for being Vosh's dad, and for more importantly, for working on the VFX for Babylon 5, one of the best shows ever made. And he replied to me with a serial number on a certain starship, and I think it was 21494 IAK, which is, IAK is the initials for Vosh, Ian Kaczynski, and his birth date is February 14th, 1994. So one of the ships in Babylon 5 has a serial number that is Vosh's birthday. And I thought that was cool. Nerodia says, ooh, I'm rewatching B5 right now. Didn't know he was on that. Babylon 5 was, I think, the first VFX show, or the first sci-fi show that used exclusively VFX for the space shots. They didn't build any practical models for the starships. And now at that time, I think they had Star Trek had started to move into it. I know Voyager, they built a physical model for Voyager that they used in the pilot, but then basically after that, all of the space shots were CG. But Babylon 5 was kind of the first one in the game to just go completely CG from the jump. And Nerodia says, it looked good for the time, didn't age too well on wide shots. Well, the problem there is that JMS filmed Babylon 5 in widescreen format. I mean, they framed shots so that they would still work on the 4:3, but he had the idea, he wanted to future-proof the show so that once we made the move to 16:9, the show could be remastered and presented in the proper widescreen. But the problem is the VFX were not produced in 16:9, they were produced in 4:3. And they lost the files for the original VFX and couldn't recreate them. So anytime that you've got a mixed VFX and live action shot, it looks terrible. Nerodia says, what is it with studios and losing film? Well, it's not a case of losing film, it was a case of losing files. It was a case of because, it's all CG renders. That's what they didn't have. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm trying to get my channel monetized, so your view means a lot. Don't forget to toss me a like and subscribe and ring the bell. I stream Mondays and Fridays at 5 p.m. and Sundays at 2 p.m., so catch me live and join in on the convo. You can find all my socials in the description below, and thank you to all my patrons with a very special shout out to my Whale Shark tier patron Ryan D and my Anemone Friends tier patron Piftle Cakes. Your support means the world. Catch you next time.